Now, the UN is accusing Israel of showing a flagrant disregard for the lives of civilians after it bombed a Gaza school where thousands were sheltering, killing at least 6 people. It says no place is safe in the crowded strip, which is rapidly running out of food, water, fuel and medical supplies to treat its 12,000 wounded. 4 days ago, Israel told Gazans to move south for their own safety, but today it bombed just outside the cities of Khan Yunis and Rafah, where hundreds of thousands have taken shelter, killing dozens of people. Hopes of a US plan to secure safe passage for aid to come into Gaza via Egypt's Rafah crossing have so far come to nothing. It remains shut a week after closing because of the airstrikes. Gaza's health ministry says those strikes have now killed around 3,000 people, almost a third of them children. That's more than double the number Hamas killed in its attacks on Israel, and fueling fears of a wider war. Ongoing clashes along Israel's northern border with Lebanon, the military trading fire with Hezbollah, which, like Hamas, has been designated a terrorist group by many countries. Israel has already evacuated villages along the border. Today it killed at least 4 Hezbollah fighters it said had tried to cross the fence to plant an explosive device. We begin with this report from our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, on the desperate situation in Gaza, and you may find some of the images in her report upsetting.
They said it would be safer in the south. The Israelis told civilians to head to Rafah on the border with Egypt. But there's no refuge in Gaza, no safe place, no escape. Israel says it's doing its best to avoid civilian casualties. That's not how it looks to those who are not only being bombed, but have also been denied water, fuel, food and medical supplies.
We were sitting here baking bread. We weren't doing anything. People are hungry because we don't even have electricity or water. People can't eat.
They rescue everyone they can reach. The block was full of people who'd fled Gaza City as instructed by the Israelis. Were men from Hamas also staying here? It's possible. But Israel's fury destroys the innocent along with the guilty. How much longer can Rafah Hospital keep going? They're running out of fuel for the generator, and Israel won't let in any more for fear Hamas will use it. Some people are running out of hope too, succumbing to overwhelming grief and despair. Trucks full of aid are still stuck on the Egyptian side of the border. Israel won't let them in, saying there's no guarantee the supplies won't go to Hamas. Civilians, once more, paying the price for the misdeeds of killers who they cannot control.
There in the south, and only in that area if it's possible, we plan to create what we call safe zones. But if this aid does not reach civilians, but goes to murderers, the safe zones will simply not exist.
The drone whines overhead as they pray for the dead in Khan Yunis, also in the supposedly safer southern zone, also hit overnight. The people of Gaza have grown familiar with the terrifying sounds that herald death.
First of all, there's the continuous buzzing, very loud buzzing sound of the spy drones. That doesn't stop. And then there's the smaller, relatively smaller, I think, targeted strikes by smaller missiles, by suicidal planes and drones, which hit specific apartments and specific small buildings. This happens like every 5 to 10 minutes. The F-16s, they hit around, like, depending on the neighborhood, like 5 to 6 times per hour. Those bring down buildings and neighborhoods to the ground.
If there's no safety in Khan Yunis, you might as well pack up and go home to Gaza City. Take your chances, trust in God.
We were told to leave Gaza City, so we went to Khan Yunis, but we couldn't find anywhere to sleep. Last night, the house next to us was targeted and 70 people died. Where should we go? We're returning to Gaza City. It's better to die at home. This is our destiny. Death is everywhere.
In Gaza City, the fires of destruction light up the darkness. The people of Gaza are preparing for another night of fear, of not knowing whether they or those they love will still be alive tomorrow morning.
Lindsay Hilson reporting. Well, the UN is sheltering some 400,000 displaced Gazans in its schools and other facilities. And as you've heard, at least 6 people have been killed in an airstrike on one of their schools. Juliet Touma is Director of Communications for the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA. She joins me now live from Amman, Jordan. Thanks very much for coming on the programme. First of all, what's your response to the fact that the IDF, the Israelis, have said evacuate south, and then they bombed the south today?
Yeah, we thought that we said that evacuation order was horrendous, in fact. And to update your figures, UNRWA is currently hosting 500,000 people in our facilities, including schools, including the school that was hit this afternoon during Israeli airstrikes and bombardments.
So you're hosting 500,000 people in an already horrendous situation on top of the population that was there before, and water, food, fuel and medicines are all running out. Give us some picture of how urgent, especially the water situation is now.
Well, Gaza has been under siege for the past 10 days, and UNRWA has not been able to bring in any supplies for the past 10 days. And we have to bring in supplies, including fuel, so that water runs back into Gaza, the Gaza Strip. And we have to bring in other supplies, including food. Already before the war started on the 7th of October, 1.2 million people depended on food aid coming from UNRWA alone. Poverty is very, very high in the Gaza Strip. So already before the war, the situation was desperate. It's becoming tragic by the minute, tragic.
And how much water effectively, I mean, in terms of, litres or less, how much water do people have?
For example, we know from our own staff that they've had to ration water to 1 liter a day. They are working, we've moved our center of command from Gaza City down south, where they're basically working out of a warehouse. And in that warehouse, which is not at all meant to shelter people, there is already 8,000 people. The situation there is awful. It's overcrowded. Hundreds of people are sharing one toilet for a very simple reason. It's a warehouse. It was not meant to have human beings living in it.
If the United States at this special summit in Jordan tomorrow do not manage to negotiate some kind of deal that opens the Rafah crossing, allowing aid in and civilians out, how many more days does the southern part of the Gaza Strip have left before people start dying because of these shortages and privations?
It's a matter of life and death already. There are probably people who have died already because of the siege. 10 days that the UN has not been able to get in any supplies into the Gaza Strip. People are already dying, probably. This is in addition to civilians being killed because of the Israeli forces' bombardment and airstrikes.
So this summit tomorrow really has to work.
The siege has got to be lifted on the Gaza Strip. The siege on the Gaza Strip has got to be lifted for organizations like UNRWA to be able to bring in much needed supplies like fuel, like wheat flour and other much needed supplies. The situation is desperate. There's no time to waste, no time.
UNRWA has been dealing with appalling situations in this part of the world ever since the beginning of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Is this the worst it's ever been?
It's unprecedented. We've not seen anything like this. We have been on the ground in the Gaza Strip, the largest UN agency in the Gaza Strip and one of the oldest. We've been there since the early 50s. This is unprecedented.
And if the hundreds of thousands of civilians cannot stay in the Gaza Strip? I know this is a politically contentious question. If they cannot stay there because the infrastructure has been destroyed, there is just no future for them there. What do you think the solution should be? Should it be a massive refugee camp in Egypt or Jordan? Because both the leaders of those countries have said, no way is that going to happen.
For now, what is really, really important is for the siege to be lifted so that humanitarian supplies come in, and for the bombardments and airstrikes and violence everywhere to come to an end. That's really the key, the key.
Julia Tuma, thank you very much indeed. Israel has accused Hamas of psychological terror against Israeli citizens after it released a video of one of the hostages it seized at the Supernova Music Festival. It shows 21-year-old Mia Shem being treated for an injured arm. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Sugandha Kamani, now reports.
Faces of the missing. Grandparents, sons, daughters, babies, all amongst the hostages abducted by Hamas and taken to Gaza. Amongst them, 21-year-old Mia. Yesterday, Hamas released a video of her. Her family want it to be seen. We're showing still images from it. She says she's okay, though desperate to come home. At a press conference, her family called for her immediate release.
I'm begging the world to bring my baby back home. She only went to a party, to a festival party, to have some fun. And now she's in Gaza.
Mia was amongst thousands of young Israelis attending a music festival close to Gaza. Last night's video is the first time they've seen her since it came under attack.
It took me, like a few seconds to press the play button. And in this period of time, maybe 10 seconds, maybe 5 seconds, everything passes your mind. What am I going to see there? Is she slaughtered there? Someone took her head off? Someone raped us? It's only her body? So you can imagine when I saw her, I started screaming and I started to cry for an hour. I couldn't help it, like all these 12 days got out in tears. I think it was happiness, because she's alive. So this was my first reaction, a huge relief.
Watching the video again, the family realised how pale Mia looks and how frightened she appears.
What is it you want the Israeli government to do now? I mean, it's a hard question to answer.
Yeah, it's a really hard question because, it's not my profession. I'm just family. I just want my niece home.
Hamas claims a number of hostages have already been killed as a result of Israeli airstrikes. In Tel Aviv this afternoon, a demonstration calling on everyone to keep the hostages at the forefront of their minds. The country is torn between a desire to keep them safe and to strike back at Hamas. At times, the protest camp has been attacked by ultranationalists. Here, a man accuses them of being left-wing traitors. Some in the right wing worry the families will impede the war effort. Eli is here, raising his voice on behalf of his 18-year-old daughter.
Who can say, as I talk as a father, that I don't want to negotiation, that my daughter is there? It's impossible to say that I don't want. I want. The other sides need to understand that they have another 2.5 million that's suffering. And they are not our enemy, and I'm sure they want to live.
The families are deliberately steering clear of politics. This is a country that up until the Hamas attack was deeply polarised. For now, their sole focus, somehow bringing their loved ones home. Well, the fate of those hostages and the possibility of a prisoner exchange is one of the key areas international diplomacy is focused on. US President Joe Biden will be here tomorrow. His visit, a show of solidarity for Israel, but it also comes amidst rising concern about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. The US had wanted to leave the Middle East behind, frankly, and focus primarily on the threat from China, from Russia. But there is real fear about the possibility of this conflict escalating further. We've seen these continuing clashes between the Israeli army and Hezbollah in the north of the country, threatening statements coming out from Iran, of course, the key supporter of both Hezbollah and Hamas. And it's difficult to know what's bravado and what represents real danger, especially in light of the failure of intelligence services to pick up on this attack that Hamas was being planned. Those concerns around Iran, the upcoming visit of Joe Biden, I think all that means that this ground offensive we've been talking about by the Israeli army, that's not going to start just yet. But at the moment, no one's talking about it being abandoned either.
Sikandar, thank you very much indeed. Grim allegations are emerging that some of the victims of Hamas's attacks were tortured and mutilated. Today, Israel made available first responders who discovered their bodies. They say that what they found was almost unspeakable. Pictures of the scenes, perhaps understandably, were not supplied, but the horror in their testimony is as graphic as it is shocking. And a warning, my report does contain extremely distressing descriptions of violence.
Honoring the dead is considered true virtue.
It was a press conference like no other, and they are volunteers like few others. Their religious mission is to recover the bodies and body parts of victims. And after 3 decades of this grim service, they thought they'd seen everything. Until that Saturday.
I'm not eating. I'm not sleeping. Not only me. You know, I went to synagogue on Saturday, meeting some friends. They were afraid to talk to me, and I saw that. They all looked in the back. Something's wrong with this guy.
What was wrong with Yossi Landa was the aftermath of butchery and torture that he and the others told us they had witnessed in a kibbutz near Gaza, which had been attacked by Hamas.
When we went in and we saw 2 piles of children, minors, I wouldn't say they were babies. I would say they're minors. I would say they were age of 10 to 15. They took him in to one place. They weren't even shot. They were the hands tied but burned. They were all burned. We go further. We going into the next house. Then we see a woman. She was about, I would say, 30, age of 30. She was lying on the floor, a puddle of blood, big puddle of blood, face down. We have to turn her over in order to put her into the body bag. She was a pregnant woman.
Israel wants the world to hear these accounts because in their eyes they justify the country's actions this week. Yossi helped out in New York after 9/11, but this attack felt more personal. We sat down with him later. You've seen so many things in your life, in your volunteer work for Zaka. How is this different?
It's the next level. It's very different. I never had that. I never had the horror, it was so painful, and how the bodies were tortured.
The upsetting thing here as well is that someone took the decision, a human being took the decision to visit this kind of violence upon other human beings.
If this is the world, I would say, don't leave me over here. I don't want to be, I don't think any human being wants to live in this kind of world.
So Yossi, there are Palestinian families in the Gaza Strip that are finding their children dead in the rubble. These children are too young to have supported Hamas or to be Hamas fighters. They are suffering, they are crying, perhaps as never before. What do you say to them?
My heart is very with them. I wish I could save them. I wish I can have those families, bring them that to my house. The problem is Hamas won't let them.
But there are innocent civilians on the other side too.
I am sure. I'm sure.
And isn't the danger that the cycle of hatred, of violence, of revenge is just perpetuated?
That's war. And the war, that's war. And war, who started the war?
But their answer to that question is never the same as the Palestinians. And that's the problem.